It's a pleasure to be speaking with the pastor of Salem Baptist Church here today. He has always been a favorite of mine, Pastor Heuter Rolle, who's been pastor here for the last 8 years. And you succeeded one of the greatest Baptist leaders in our country. How did you feel when you filled the shoes of, did you fill the shoes of the Reverend C.W. Saunders?
Well, it's good, first of all, Wendell, to have you here. I consider this an honor for you to be interviewing me today. And certainly, I consider this a pleasure.
Yeah.
The last 8 years, one of I believe the first things that people said to me when I was going to take over Salem Union Baptist Church from the great Reverend Dr. Charles W. Saunders, he said, "Boy, I don't know how you're going to fill his shoes, because they some big shoes." And here is how I went into it, and here's how I saw it, Wendell. I knew that I wasn't going to be good at doing that. And I would say to them, what I'm going to do is do the best job I can at walking in my own. And I feel that that has redounded well for me in the past 8 years. Not to try to fill those shoes, but to build on what was established by him and the others at this church, and to continue on that great work that they started.
But you know, the church had a particular personality.
Yes.
As a result of the 39 years that Reverend Saunders spent
Yes.
in the leadership.
Yes.
Did you seek to make any changes at all?
Well, certainly, Wendell, I believe that every leader is what I call seasonal. Every leader is called to serve a particular generation. And I believe that the time that Reverend Saunders was here, God had called him for that particular season. He was an educator. People knew him as a great administrator. He had many great students that passed through his hand over the years. He was well respected in the community, a man that everyone looked up to, even though he was very stern. And in the time that I believe he was here at Salem from 1974 until he retired in 2013, he would have filled many key roles, not only in the church, but in government. For his first, people, I don't know if people really recognize it, but for Rev's first, I believe, 2 years as pastoring this church, he was a deputy permanent secretary in the Ministry of Education while he was pastoring here. In addition, he was also, I believe, the permanent secretary, or maybe it's the deputy permanent secretary as well, at the Ministry of Agriculture.
Yes.
He moved from education and went to agriculture.
Yeah.
After he did that, when he left education, then they called him, the Baptists then called him to be the president of the Bahamas National Baptist Missionary and Educational Convention.
Yes.
Then they called him, Wendell, to be the principal of Princeville at the school.
Yeah.
And I believe that God called him at that particular time for that season, because in addition, in that season, he became the superintendent of the Bahamas Baptist Union as well. So he was the pastor of Salem. He was the superintendent of the Bahamas Baptist Union of Churches. He was the president of the Bahamas National Baptist Missionary and Educational Convention. He was the principal of Princeville. And all of those, he would have done very well and turned them around. So I don't know if anyone could have been chosen at that time, a better person, the personality to lead Salem, to lead the Bahamas Baptist Union, indeed to lead the National Baptist Convention, where it was at a great height at that time. Well respected home and abroad.
He was indeed a great administrator, and so it brings me very neatly to the question that I want for you. You are a full-time pastor at Salem.
Yes.
And so you would have a whole lot of time, more time perhaps in a full-time
Yes.
capacity than Reverend Saunders in his heyday.
Yeah.
When you became pastor, I'm sure there were certain things that you had in mind that you wanted to achieve in Salem.
Yes.
What were some of those things?
Okay. One of the things, Wendell, that's key to any pastor or anybody that is seeking the pastorate is that you ought to have a philosophy of ministry. Anyone who doesn't have a written one, you have one. Okay? And that one that is not written is not going to be very successful. So you need to have a philosophy of ministry. While I was off in seminary, Wendell, that was where I formulated in my mind what my philosophy of ministry would be. That actually is a class that you have to present to a professor as to what do you see your ministry looking like. So I at the time like to formulate in my mind what is the vision that I see for Salem Union Baptist Church. Now, having been a member of the church for many years, grown up here, you would have a feel for the church over the years. And one of the things that was rather unique about this church, on which my philosophy of ministry would take off from, was that in the 100 now and 28 years that would be completed for this church, we had 3 pastors. The church began with Reverend Daniel Wilshire in 1892. He served from 1892 to 1932. Reverend Enoch Backford Sr. took over from 1932 and he retired in 1974. Then Reverend Dr. Charles Saunders took over in 1974 and he retired 39 years later in 2013. 120 years, Wendell. And all of them nearly made 40 years and over.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
Now here's the uniqueness about these men. All of these men had a particular, what I'd call style or theology. And they had this that was unique about this church. They had what I consider to be a theology of the head that did not stop them from having the Spirit guide them in ministry.
What does that mean?
Here's what that means. They believed in teaching and preaching sound doctrine that gets you to get the what I call the teachings of God in your head. That you don't need to, because most people, sometimes in theology, Wendell, we have this idea that all we need is the Spirit. No. You need to get educated in the Word of God along with the Spirit. That's what I mean, a theology of the head that does not stop them or did not stop them from having a burning desire in their heart. You need both, because with the anointing and knowledge, you would be able to better equip people for the work of the ministry. Reverend Daniel Wilshire was great at it. Enoch Backford Sr. was great at it. Charles W. Saunders was great at it. And then I came behind them, all men who had great shoes.
Yes.
And that is where I had to take off and build from, to build on that foundation that they already laid.
So the philosophy hasn't changed?
Philosophy hasn't changed. The philosophy hasn't changed. In this church, when you call, I call it, I have a little motto at my Bible study. You need to have a mind for truth and have a heart for God. We believe in both those, educating the mind and also having a heart that is anointed by the Spirit of God. You can't work it, in my view, and be successful trying to do one of them. You need to have both of them so that you educate people in the scriptures and at the same time to tell them to live by the power of the Spirit.
So how have you been able, and how are you working on getting members, followers of Salem to appreciate that philosophy?
Okay, good. The thing about it, Randall, is they are already, they were well grounded in it over the years. So much so, Randall, that sometimes when people would come to Salem, they have to get used to coming to Salem and preaching, because the people are used to, not because they're not saying much back to you, means that they are not listening to you. They have been trained to listen. Particularly the last pastor we had. He wants you to, don't shout ignorantly. It's his words.
Yes.
Listen, man. Listen to what I'm saying. And when that moves your heart, then you can shout. But don't shout and you ain't hear nothing yet. Because some people, you can hardly get a word out.
Yeah.
No. Listen to it so that it can edify you. And when it edifies you, you say amen. Now, let me get a little further on, Randall, but how I built on that. So how I built on that was this. In keeping the teachings of sound doctrine, one of the strongest points of my philosophy of ministry is this. We have to be able to feed those that we have, but yet reach out to those who are out there and are lost. So the Bible calls us, according to the book of Acts, that while we can start in Jerusalem, the mission is worldwide. Jerusalem, home. Judea, you could call that familiar space. Jerusalem we'll call home base. That's where the church started. The area of Judea, Palestine, that was familiar space. And then Samaria. That's crosstown, what I call crosstown, cross culture.
Yes.
And then the ends of the earth.
The uttermost parts.
Uttermost parts of the earth. That is the ministry that Jesus called us. He called us not only to take care of home, both in Jerusalem. You see? So I know a lot of people say, man, you got to get home straight first. No, Jesus didn't leave them to get Jerusalem straight first.
Yes.
Matter of fact, when they tried to stay in Jerusalem, when a little long, persecution came and drove them out. So that what he's saying is, if you are going to pastor or lead the church of the Lord Jesus Christ, you do need to have a home base. But home base is there for you to build on so that you could train them to go to Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth.
Are you suggesting, Pastor Rolle, that Salem is not the traditional Baptist church in the truest sense of the term?
Well, I don't now. When you say traditional, we are considered a traditional church in our liturgy. And even in that way, I'm talking about in our order of worship.
Yes.
And even that has changed.
And in doctrine.
And in doctrine, right? So what we have found out, I as I look back over the years, Randall, in my years and coming up in the church did not really change in the Bahamas until around 1982. I watched this. All of these, most of the traditional Baptist churches that would be filled, Randall, on Sunday morning, so the Salems, the Zions, the St. Paul's, St. John's Native, and all the various, these churches were filled on Sunday mornings. And even on Sunday evenings, it probably just dropped 20% because people came to church on Sunday morning and came to Sunday night just like they came on Sunday morning.
Right.
But something happened around 1982. A new ministry came in the country. A man named Miles Monroe came. Bahamas Faith Ministries. The ministry was geared towards youth and drawing people who would not normally even go to church. And that took a hold in this country. And what it actually did was, it actually changed a whole lot of the modes of worship. The liturgy changed.
And
if you wanted to keep your young people.
So people were this charismatic way appeal to young people.
It always has, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So your church then, and Baptist churches and many other churches then, in terms of church attendance, you say declined?
It declined in the youth, for certain, the young people, when they were flocking to this youth movement. You know, where young people is, young people want to go. It was exciting and it was new and it was fresh and all that. And I think that basically all churches, not just Baptists, but I think that many other denominations, Catholics, Anglicans, all of them felt the loss of youth at that particular time. This started, Wendell, in the early 80s.
Would you also suggest, Pastor Rolle, that a wave of secularism came into the society as well?
Certainly.
That caused a drop-off in church attendance?
Certainly, Wendell, that has happened. And that, one of the things that really affects the church, and this is the church now, I'm talking about worldwide. It's a movement that they call modernism. The 19th century. The church has been affected in the world, starting in Europe, in its birthplace, right? Where modernism affected church attendance. Here's what modernism does. It moves people out of these rural areas. When, you know, if you live in the country, people lived in the country, they lived off subsistence farming. The church was a part of the community, and so you lived right in the area, and everybody went to church.
People live closer to God.
Closer to God. All of a sudden now, we have the industrial movement come in. So people are building these big buildings, the industrial movement is coming on. People then move from these rural areas now into more urban areas. And now, women who used to be home with children are now finding jobs. The women who used to be there and taking care of the kids, you know, we had that kind of a society where just the men went out to work and the women were home and taking care of the kids. And during that time, it was a much more effective bringing up of children. They knew more about the Lord from home. It was further inculcated at the church what was already practiced at home. And whenever people start to get, what should I say? When they start to, when the work becomes, what should I say? The proliferation of jobs that people had. Now I got to work to pay for my apartment. I've got to work. See, when you move to the city, it costs you. And one of the greatest things it did was it took away their focus on what happened on the weekend, which was the Sunday. That's how secularism began many, many years ago, hundreds of years ago. secularism began to take hold in society, and people stopped coming to church because they had too much jobs. The same thing happened in our society just back in the 60s, Wendell, when there was not, people went to church because jobs were not that readily hard. And the minute we started to flourish, then secularism becomes a part of it. And now I got to go out. The hotels are filled with people. We need these kinds of activities at the hotel. So the guy who used to play in the church and sing in the choir, he got a band now, and he's out playing for entertainment. He's been pulled from his spirituality to go out into the world to make that almighty dollar.
And so when the Bahamas was more a rural society, church attendance was higher.
Certainly.
Now, you talked about modernism, but we might be in a post-modern society.
Certainly now.
Now.
Yeah.
And there is a view that the church, for a whole lot of people, has become an irrelevancy.
Yeah.
How do you make, in your pastorate, how do you make Salem relevant and compelling to your members and for those who you want to be members of Salem?
I'm glad you asked that question, Wendell, because that would point me in the direction of my vision for the church. This is my philosophy of church, how church ought to function in society. Because, see, Jesus did not create this church. When I talk about the church, I'm talking about the church at large, to come and to function by itself. The church is what I would call is cosmic in scope. When Jesus said he birthed his church to take over the world. So the church is supposed to affect every sphere of life. And that's what I believe. So that the church is not sitting here so that people can come to a building, receive knowledge and information, and that is not lived out in society. Now, if that is your vision, that the real meaning of church, ecclesia, a group of persons that are called out of society for the specific purpose of going back and being a blessing, being salt and light in that very society. That's what we are called to do. So church, Wendell, is not church that comes together and does not go out. You see, you're doing half. So God's vision for the church, or Jesus, which he worked out in Christ Jesus, was that he came down here and he worked with 12 men. He started with 12 men. He brought them together, took them out of their environs that they were used to doing, and trained them for 3.5 years. For what purpose? To go out and to influence the world for him. So that is my philosophy of ministry. That is the reason for church. If you don't get that, then I think you have church wrong. All right? So if that is the foundation on which we are building on, it means that I must be intentional about training the people here, getting them excited about doing exactly that. We are not a church that sits down on Sunday morning, hears the word of God, and do not actively become involved in community.
So you've changed the thrust of Salem Union Baptist Church.
Yes.
You probably used to be a little conservative, but you now have an evangelistic thrust.
I wouldn't say that that's something new, but it's at another level at this time.
Okay.
Because as a young person in this church, we did a lot of it, but it was not what I would say at the level at which we are doing it now, and intentioned as we are doing it now, right? What I mean by that is this. So if you have this philosophy, then you build the things to help you to get that done. So if Salem is the church that is, it sits here on Taylor Street, between Taylor Street and Ross Corner, it means that God intentionally put you there to be light in this area, not just in the building, in this area. When we look at the area and see what is happening in the area, I mean, you can see, it's like you'll have to, Wendell, walk over. It's like the rich man and Lazarus. He saw Lazarus there. Lazarus was there begging at the man's, or just looking for something to eat at the man's gate, and he hopped over him and never even recognized he was there. In a lot of churches, I think that is what we're doing. So a neighbor is crying out for help, but the church is walking over them because they're busy, Wendell, trying to get to church. And then after church, trying to get home. And so the people in the neighborhood do not feel you. They don't feel you. So here is what we set out to do. We set out to reach out and touch people. Okay? So that you get the people here on Sunday morning, and I did this, Wendell, for 2 years. We preach outreach, how we ought to lift up the fallen, reach out and help the dying, snatch them from pity, from sin and the grave, weeping o'er the erring ones and lifting up the fallen and telling them of Jesus, because you cannot tell them of Jesus when they're hungry. Right? And so intentionally, we set out to do that, to touch people. Men's ministry, I changed the name of the men's ministry from Men's Fellowship to Salem's Mighty Men's Ministry. And that's the acronym Mighty Men. Intentionally helping, or going, helping and touching. Might. The women's ministry, you change that to Salem's Women in Ministry. Their acronym is LIGHTS. Ladies, intentionally going, helping and touching, so that people feel you. See, it's very hard for you to tell someone that you care for them, Wendell, if you can't put your arms around them when they're going through hurt and when they're going through pain. So we did a campaign. I set out, and I did this personally now, Wendell. I did this personally. So it took me about 3 months to do this. Myself, 1 or 2 other members, and 1 or 2 gentlemen from this area. And we built a square. Ross Corner on the south, Market Street on the west, Lewis Street on the north, East Street on the east. That is the square that we decided that we would touch and influence. We didn't want to go too big now. Just get enough so we know we can eat and be effective with them. And we visited every house in that square. We talked to everyone we could talk to in that square and introduce ourselves to them. Pastor Heuter Rolle from Salem Union Baptist Church. I want you to know I just took over as pastor down the road, and we want to get to know you, and assist in any way that we can. Everyone wrote down the names of everybody, and we built a database. There are 19 streets in that square, about 250 houses in that square. And so we divided them up, and we have 13 street teams that their role is to minister to every street in this square. Once a month they have to go out. Take groceries in your back trunk. Don't wait. Just take it in your back trunk, because those who, you meet, you want to be able to help. If you cannot meet the need, you bring that back to the pastoral staff, and we'll look at that. Now, we don't pay light bill and all that kind of stuff to get, but we'll help people. And we found that, Mendel, that people were very surprised, because now they say, oh, I guess people care about us. People think about us. Man, I didn't ever know people come and do this kind of stuff, reaching out and touching people. That affected even the gang in the area, okay? To the extent that relationships are now formed, and trust now is being given to a pastor and a church. Everyone I found out, Wendell, everybody is looking to be loved. No matter how angry they are, if they could find out that somebody loves them, not for what they could do for them, but that you reached out and extended love to them for nothing, that does something to somebody. And so after a while, then you'll see them come to the back of the church. They'll start to walk in. That's how Christ draws people to his church. Too many churches, Wendell, I think they are busy fishing in other churches. While they're busy fishing for members, proselytizing members from other churches, the world is going to hell. You see, sinners are going to hell. There are so many lost people you could pick, choose, and refuse who you're going after. Man, listen, if you are in a particular neighborhood, God set you there for a reason. We ain't in this neighborhood just to be here.
But it's a small square.
Yes.
Why haven't you expanded that square?
Okay, now, the idea is this. I remember when I shared that idea, somebody asked me, the question is always asked, well, why didn't you go out? Okay? And my idea is that what we want to do is to perfect what we're doing in a small area, micro, before we go out macro. Another reason for that too, Wendell, is that I feel out the people in my area. So I'm learning now. I started out just with that area. By 2019, we didn't do one last year, but by 2019, the churches in this area, we worked together along with Bishop Ulanana, Bishop Carlton Stewart right here from Lily in the Valley corner, Zion East and Shirley Street, the Big Yard Sunday School through the corner with Fergie. We all get together for a month during the month of August, and we have this outreach. And then at the end of it, we actually do it at the cathedral, the Church of God Cathedral, Bishop Hewell and Hannah, where we come together in a service at the end of it, and it is a great evangelistic thrust. So, and it seems as if every year we add one. Then we go Windsor, the church to Windsor Lane. And that is how it is expanded, because every pastor, Wendell, and I can't leave out Bishop Thompson, can't leave him. A man who is very interested in community. Wesley Thompson, Mount Pleasant Green. He's big on this. So shout out to Wesley. These people have a heart, the same heart that we have for what we're doing. So it's like-minded. And one of the great problems is trying to do things with people, Wendell, who do not have the same heart and mind as you do. And that's why we are careful how we expand it out.
Now, there are a whole lot of people who are materialistic, and they want the church to help them in the provision of food and all the rest of it. But the church is really about winning souls as well. And to what extent have you seen a difference in the community and people changing their lives for the better?
Let me say this, Brenda, there are always opportunists out there. There are persons who would want to take advantage of situations. And the best thing I can say is we just have to have like a spirit of discernment with many people. One of the things that I do, Wendell, that's why I have that square. We know everybody in the square, Wendell. We know what their needs are. As we sit right now in this studio, on the other side of this studio, that door you see over there, Wendell, those doors, you cannot see in the back there, but that is our pantry. In that pantry, the members of this church are asked on a regular basis to bring stuff, food stuff. We don't really have to ask anymore. Sometimes we just have to say the pantry is running low. and people come and they replenish that pantry. I was doing this for about 6, 7 years before I got to find out there's a particular member of the church, Wendell, I never knew the member was. But every so often, a big truck from Dalbenas would come.
Okay.
they'd call and say, listen, we come to drop off. And the person never ever says who they are. But I came to drop off these stuff to the pantry, right? Now, what we do with those...
Did you find out the person? Who the person was?
I eventually found out.
Okay.
But that's like between me and them. And I really congratulate them for that. A young couple, and he just does it, and he doesn't want anybody to know. So because he doesn't want anybody to know, it ain't for me to tell anybody. That's his blessing.
Right.
The pantry serves some of our members, but the majority of our members do not depend on the pantry. Thank God a majority of them don't. And what that does is it leaves that food stuff available for me to be able to assist in the community. I'm not one of them, the pastors, Wendell, that believes I don't have a ministry to feed the hungry en masse. That's not my calling, and I don't know that that's a church calling. Okay? In my view now, there ought to be organizations out there like on some people like Brother Hansalu that does a wonderful job of it out there, and so on and so forth. But I don't consider that to be a big function. I consider the church to use these things in order to be able to draw people to Christ. My role is not just to take people, for them to come, in my view, Randall, just to sit down and eat and go back and drink and then go back in society without touching them. I don't consider that to be the role of the church. What I consider to be the role of the church is food is a means. And I saw Jesus, that's how he acted. Listen, man, I need to get this message to you, but you are hungry. Philip, Jesus, how could be, these people, we can't buy nothing for them to eat. You see how much people is this, Jesus? He says, no, just tell them, sit down, we gonna work it out. And when he was done feeding them, that's his time to speak to them. Because your belly ain't growling, Wendell. And so these people would sit down and this is Jesus now, the anointed Son of God. So as he preached, he could be talking to them, Wendell, for hours, and they sit there and they felt like they've been there for 10 minutes. That's why he would take care of them in that manner, so that we use the pantry so that we could preach the gospel. You see? Now, those who have the idea that they want to be, I don't share that philosophy. My philosophy is, when I reach out my hand to you, it is intentional what I'm doing. I might not get to talk to you today, but I am setting you up to be able to talk to me. It might take me months, but I'm just loving on you and loving on you. And even before I speak a word, here's this. This is what people can figure you out, Wendell. Before you speak a word to them, they've already recognized that you love them. Yeah. Because you're preaching your life.
Salem has or had an aging membership, and of course, over the 100 and something years that you spoke of, you've seen some generational changes in Salem.
Yes.
How do you go about in reaching the youth of our country? Not necessarily those people whose parents or their ancestors started Salem, but to break new ground with young people.
Okay, here's what I find, Wendell, with young people, and of course there are various constituencies of young people. There are those out there in community who we consider to be those who are really unchurched. They never came to church or anything like that.
And at risk.
At risk, yes. And then there are some people who their parents brought them to church as children, but they, for whatever reason, as they grew older, when they became teenagers, they stopped coming to church. There's a great number in that category. Of course, the greater number are those now who wouldn't put the church is completely irrelevant to them. Okay? Their parents, for whatever reason, never brought them to church. And so they're just out there lost and probably don't even know how lost they are.
Yeah.
So the idea is that the church must necessarily extend its hand into both constituencies, right? The ones now, let's deal with the ones who know about God, came to church while they were young, and they are not interested in coming to church with their parents any longer because church, they've found either they went off to school and they got a particular kind of education that told them they don't need God. Those persons are the persons that are looking for a new experience in church. They don't want their parents' church.
They don't want the traditional
They don't
church.
want the traditional church.
Yes.
What they want is they want their, what you call, youth church.
A new construct.
New construct, right. Now, what happened is, while I recall this very vividly, while I was in seminary, we got a project to do in seminary on youth church worldwide in the last 30 years. That's when I was there. And we had to research youth church in the last 30 years because this is a phenomena that everybody has to deal with, not just here in the Bahamas.
Yes.
I mean, this is all over. And what we found out is that youth churches are very popular because they love being to themselves. They are with their peers. They don't need to look like me and you. They're not going to wear a jacket. They can be, loosey-goosey and do whatever. The music is totally different. And that's what they want. Okay? Now, how does the church reach out to those people? And here is what it's very difficult, Wendell, to do this because the churches that cater to the younger demography, those are the ones who do what we call really youth stuff. The only problem with youth church that we found out, Wendell, is that it cannot last.
What do you mean?
Let me tell you what I mean. You will grow older. See, you're not going to be 20 forever. If you build a church for 20 years old, it is going to be obsolete. Right? So, the people that were 30 when you could really appreciate all that stuff, there's somebody behind you who is 10 years old right now. When they get to be 20, they're going to wonder what in the world you're doing. Which means it always would be revolving.
Yes.
Right? And if we are not careful, what happens is those youth who go to that youth church, when the church gets older, right, then what happens is they're going to be looking at the ones that came behind them and say, man, listen, this is the kind of church that we used to.
So that means that Salem must have different modes of worship?
Yeah, there you go. So here is the model. The model that we came up, that is the most successful in having youth matriculate to what we call big church, is that you must have them come to big church with their families, as a family. And pastor must do his best to recognize young people in church so that you have the worship service is structured so that you ignore no constituent in the church. So you got younger people, so the older people can't say, well, Rev, we only know about songs and the Rev them of the past. You come here to bring praise and worship. And my answer to them is, you bet. The younger ones who say, Pastor, these old people, they only want to do these old songs and so on and so forth and so on. I can keep them. So the best thing is that no one needs Wendell to be selfish. We have to deal with constituencies of persons in the church, and it is a very difficult task because the older people are there, the mature people are there, they're keeping things going.
So how have you been able to navigate because that is a conundrum.
It certainly is. It certainly is. It's a real conundrum, and how we are working it is like this. We still have, Wendell, our children and teens who do not come in big church. Okay? Let me say this now, that in my time, Wendell, all of us were in church. All of us were in church.
Yeah.
And we all were able to sit down and listen to sermons from our pastors who was much older than us. We were used to it. Now, what I am understanding today, Wendell, is that this is what the teachers tell me. The children cannot, or they do not learn like that today. They can only sit down, Wendell, and listen for 15 minutes. This is what I am told is happening. And you have to teach them in pictures. So that the way of learning, the methods of learning have changed. And so what a 15-year-old, and I had to sit down and be taught these things, Wendell, so I could appreciate what I'm dealing with. They say, Rev, you know, these children different today. They ain't learning like they used to.
So the message is the same, but the methodology.
The methodology has to change, and you have to speak to them much differently, Wendell, because you cannot take for granted that they know one Bible story or an individual. Some, believe it or not, people don't know who Joseph is. They don't know who Daniel is. They don't know who David is. I mean, like, and these are people, these are our young people. That's what makes it very difficult for them to be able to sit in a church service and to hear you preach a message.
So you've had to design a program to make it compelling for young people.
Definitely. Definitely.
And you think you are succeeding there?
Well, let me say this. I think that we are making small strides, I would say. But the fact is, I am very thankful that they are coming.
Okay.
They are coming. Now, that's the teens now. We have a very strong and vibrant children's ministry.
Okay.
But the problem that we find in churches today isn't so much the children. It is when they are grown enough to be able to make a choice for themselves. Are they going to say, yes, I want to go to church? That's the problem. That's the problem that we have today.
Okay. The last year and a half has been very challenging for the world.
Yes.
The church has been challenged by COVID-19. How have you been able to keep things moving here in Salem with social distancing, the wearing of masks? How has COVID-19 impacted your ministry here in Salem?
Well, Wendell, I must say that it was a very challenging year last year for everybody. I don't think that any church can say it wasn't challenging. We certainly had our challenges here. But let me tell you a little bit about how we dealt with COVID-19 here. In my vision that I started to talk about, that I set out my philosophy of ministry, one of the pillars of my vision was what I call the ends of the earth ministry. The ends of the earth ministry that I set forth in my vision was the ministry of media, reaching into places that we can't physically go to. How do I affect people around the world? Amazingly, in 2018, every year I set forth my vision at the church's anniversary. And one of the things that I set forth in my 2018 vision was that we were going to prepare ourselves. We were going to invest in installing the equipment that we need for the media ministry. Had absolutely no idea about the events that would happen some 12 months later. By January of that would have been the year 2019. By January of 2020, so that would have been my vision for 2019. By 2020, January, I had completed the media remodeling, upgrading to get us all of the equipment that we need, cameras, the church and all that, to be able to get our message across on every social media platform that we possibly could. Some persons, Wendell, they were even want to say, well, man, Pastor, why you spending all that money? Why are you spending all that money on media equipment? And I said, no, don't worry about it. I believe that this is necessary. And so they just waited and waited. And when March came along, and boom, the country was shut down, we had a media department that was able to not miss a beat, to reach out to our people with the regular Bible study, with prayer meeting, with church on Sunday morning, and we did not miss one vendor during COVID-19. Now, it was a challenge for everyone, funding-wise, for the church. But for Salem in particular, we thought that we would fall into the same kind of category as so many other ministries. The people, Wendell, of Salem, they did not need me to remind them. So now you know, church ain't going on, but ministry still has to go on, so on and so forth. And many of them, Wendell, they never, while some came and dropped their tithes, push it under the door, so on and so forth, to ensure that the work goes forward, some people never came. They are so disciplined that they kept their envelopes until they came to church. Some people came back, Wendell, with 6 and 7 envelopes when they came and said, boom. And the church did not miss a beat. Now, of course, there was a small drop in the offerings and in the tithes, because some people, they don't recall or they don't remember, Wendell, but I ain't been to church last week and I normally put this amount of offering and they ain't gonna bring 2 offerings. But I find out that they didn't miss on the tithes. In their minds, it is sunken in their minds that this belongs to the Lord, and they did that, Wendell. So, I mean, we were really, really blessed in that. We did not fall off that much during the year financially. That is because over the years, our forefathers trained them in that. I am the recipient of those people because they learned, they were trained in doing that.
So this whole thing about COVID-19 and the use of technology, it has opened vistas of opportunity for Salem.
Certainly. Let me say this. While there were negatives about COVID-19, the negative is, here's a negative about COVID-19 for the church. Because the whole meaning of church, synagogue, means gathering. That's the essence of church, Wendell. It is a group of persons where there's 2 or 3 who come together physically. When the church is established, they established them in the New Testament after the day of Pentecost, when Peter preached and those thousands of persons came to Christ, some 3,001 go. They did not have a mega church. Those people went to church in homes. They call them oikos, church homes. And the reason you had oikos was so that people came together in small houses and everybody knew everybody. So I knew Wendell. Only 10 or 20 of us. If Wendell is hurting, we know he lives right down the street. We could meet his needs. We could pray together for them when we know they sick. It's not some mega church where you got 3,000 people, the pastor don't know who in the church. Right? So churches were gathering places where necessarily they had to lean on each other. That was taken away from us last year.
Yeah. So do you think COVID-19, this whole pandemic, is going to have a lasting impact on the churches and how you do church?
Yes.
How you worship?
Yeah. Certainly. I'll say this. Let me say one more point before I answer that question, Wendell. I was supposed to speak about the positive side of it. So that's the negative was that we couldn't come together. But the positive was we had technology. So our audience grew exponentially. We had people writing us from Africa, from all over the world. As you know, with YouTube and Facebook, you can watch the algorithms. You can see who is watching.
Yes.
You can get your printout, and you can tell, okay, these amount of persons are watching me from this place. These are the age groups, so on and so forth, that are watching. So we had a vast reach. That's the positive side. And right now, now that we are back in gathering, we cannot stop what we were doing with those programs because the people are continuing to ask for them, saying, "No, you can't come off." So the positive is that the reach, God, in the negative impact that we had, where it was all about us right here, God used COVID to expand the gospel. That's the positive side of it. Now, the question that you were saying, Wendell, that's true. Even some members now who are not comfortable coming to church, the reason that many of them are not comfortable coming, they don't have to say, well, I could go to church right in my front room. That is affecting the church, but people have still not come back to church in the same numbers as they did before. And I would dare say that is happening in many churches because they've gotten comfortable, Wendell, with going to church at home. And they ain't missing nothing because if you have a nice TV program and so on and so forth, they just like they're there. You know? So while we appreciate them, particularly the Salem, I appreciate the Salemites because they are not so much like many other churches. When they don't come to church, they don't send their tithes. These people will send their tithes. But the fact of the matter is, we still miss them being there. So I think that church will never go back to that same way. A church will always have that, what I said, an extension now of media ministry. I have more people, Wendell, triple the people I had in prayer meeting on a Monday night who we have on the social media.
And so you Zooming and all of that.
We had to do all that.
Yes.
But now I Zoom Bible study, but I still have in-face Bible study.
Okay.
Because there's something about in-face Bible study that people like. You can nuance it, people can ask questions, and they miss that. Yeah. But I still, Wendell, I'm on my regular time for Bible study on the social media.
Is it in terms of there are a whole lot of people who've become emotionally attached to certain things of the church. They want to be among in a congregation.
Right.
They just want to be there.
Yes. Yeah. See, people, and I would dare say, well, there's a whole. The older people in particular,
yes,
they used to being around people.
Right.
They don't want you to no Zoom on for them anyhow.
Right.
Now, what has happened is that for many older people, they require their grandchildren or their children to drop them. Yeah. So granddaughter and grandson say, now, Grammy, you ain't going to church. We ain't want to take you because, you know, we don't want you vulnerable, right? So we don't want you to go. So they're the ones that kind of get held. Some older people say, listen, I just go to the food store. Say, food store, you always take me there. Don't tell me if God keep me in the food store, if God keep me going this place, if God keep me going that place, I going to church. Plain and simple. So that a good number of them have come back, Wendell.
And you shouldn't forsake the assembling together.
No, sir.
Yes.
While I do say that, what I do, Wendell, is there are some people who are genuinely, or I would say, I don't know if I should legitimize, but they legitimately, they have some mitigating circumstances. They have some comorbidities where they say, listen, we have a really, really want to come, but I can't make it. I understand that. And I wouldn't want to put a guilt trip on anyone to say, forsake not the assembling of yourselves coming together. But those of you who know you can, you ought to be there. That's how I look at it.
Pastor Rolle, as I came here, I saw a number of things happening around the church. You're building a campus, I call it. There is a park across the street. It's named the Enoch Backford Park.
Yes.
And there are a number of activities. You must have a whole lot of revenue coming in to do all of these things around Salem.
A lot of people think that, Wendell, but I normally tell people that, what God does is whenever God gives anyone a vision, He makes provision for us to be able to carry it out. And then in any number of instances, there's one 3-letter word that I learned to use that He asks us to do, and He says, just ask. Sometimes there are people out there that you ask who are willing to participate with you in expanding the kingdom of God. One of the things, Wendell, that you see out there that, and I've gotten this from at least the last 2 pastors. I don't know the first pastor, but I understand they would have gotten, their vision from him. But in the church does not practice that you do building expansion out of church operating budgets.
Okay.
So that when you're doing extending programs, that's what you do to raise offerings from the people for. And the people, starting from Reverend Backford's time that I know of, he never believed in cookouts and selling fries. He didn't believe that in the church. So that those are things he thinks ought to be coming from the people, the believers. And we do our best to follow in that vein. Right? Now, here's how I do that, Wendell, how I lead the people in that. I give them my vision for what I'm doing. That park that you see out there, we have expended some like $50,000 on it so far. That is missional. That was built for mission. That's a basketball court, yes. We fenced it up, we walled it around, and we built 2 canopies, 2 sheds under there. Under that shed, because of what's happened during COVID, a lot of children in our neighborhood are not equipped to be able to have internet services, to be able to do their homework. They don't have devices. Many of them don't even have electricity, and they'll have on top of internet. That was designed and will have free Wi-Fi internet service on the park. It'll only be at certain times now, because we don't want the internet to be on for them to be doing their little things with. Everything we do out there, we want to be supervised. So from the time they come home from 4 o'clock until at least 7:30 to 8 o'clock, someone will be there to supervise activities. We also have a homework center up here to be able to assist our young people, our young children now, to be able to still get an education in the midst of all this that's going on. Additionally, they've been locked up and cooped up in these houses all these months. They need to be able to have somewhere to go just to get the fresh breeze. And so we invested in that for that particular purpose. That's one purpose. The next purpose is that we do an at-risk boys program that will be happening out there. That happens 3 days a week. That's the place where that will happen. We have somebody who actually is employed with us, who works here at the church, who deals with these people 3 days a week, right? And so we have this philosophy of ministry, as I go back to it, of reaching out to people to extend love to them so that they can see that being in Christ means something more than coming to church.
Are you then a follower of liberation theology?
I wouldn't go there. I wouldn't say that I go that far, Wendell. No, I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't call that. I consider what I'm doing just following the example and the ministry of Jesus Christ. This is exactly how we acted. We don't need to come up with anything new. If we follow the ministry of Jesus Christ, watch how he walked, watch what he did, just follow and mimic that. If you follow and mimic that. Now, if you call that liberation theology, then I am one. But I don't consider that to be liberation theology.
Okay.
But that is what we're doing. Jesus told us exactly what he wanted us to do. He said, listen, man, you are the salt of the earth. Salt is no good, Wendell, in the box. Salt preserves only that which it comes into contact with.
Yes.
So it means that as salt, you cannot stay away from those that need saltiness. He says next, you are the light of the world. Light shows its genius in the dark. There's no need for you to turn on a light where another light is. It's not going to be effective. If I turn another light on in here, Wendell, you wouldn't know. But if the room is dark and I turn a light on, it shows its genius. That's what we are called to do. He told us that's what he wanted us to do. Mix with the people, touch them. That's what he was doing, touching the dead son of the woman of Nain, being it, feeding it, doing that. And then at the end of the day, he preaches the gospel to them and they come running to him.
As a pastor, when people ask you what is abundant living, what do you say?
Abundant living to me is, first of all, being connected to Jesus Christ. Abundant living is being able to take care of your needs and have a little more to bless somebody else with. Abundance to me is not being a millionaire. No, abundance is you have enough to care for your needs and you have something left over. Watch this now, Wendell. To be a blessing to others. That's abundance. If you're doing that. And anybody who is doing that, what happens is God takes the overage that you give and he begins to multiply that because he knows he can trust you to be a blessing to more people. Because a Christian, a lot of people don't see themselves like this, Wendell, but this is how I see a person who is a believer. Jesus, who is the head of the church, he is in heaven. He says his body is here on earth. I wonder what they think the body is here to do. So the body is connected to the head. So we are the feet of that head and we are the hand. So whatever it is that we are doing, we are his hand extended. And that's why we are the feet that is carrying his message. And whatever you have that you are being a blessing to others with, he'll go ahead and bless you with more so that he can give more.
You've been here for 8 years and you've done some wonderful things, Pastor Rolle. You believe that you are fulfilling your mission, I'm sure.
Yes, certainly.
But there must be some challenge that you have moving forward.
There's always challenges. If a person doesn't have challenges, when they question if they're really following what I consider to be righteous leadership. No one can lead an organization, stand up for righteousness, and not get challenged or persecuted.
So in terms of growth for your ministry here in Taylor Street, how do you look at growing this ministry?
Okay.
This is 2021.
Yes.
And perhaps you have another 20 years to be in the pastorate. And if you were to go after the record of the other pastors, you probably have 20-something years to go.
Well, Wendell, I'm not going to challenge any of those records that were before me. Certainly, my wife and children would not want me to even try that. But here's what I would say to you. This is how I consider growth. And here it is, Wendell. I try to stay biblical on things. Growth of a ministry really and truly is not what God asks us to do. God never asks us to increase. What he asks us for, that sounds a little strange to you, but here it is. He asks us to be faithful. If we are faithful in following his mandate, he brings increase. So my role in ministry is to develop people. You see, is to pour into people. And as we pour into people, they will reproduce themselves. Sometimes I think we get thrown off course in ministry when we try to grow the church. Because what happens there, Wendell, is we trying to compete with some other church who is a mega church who have 2,000 members. What that means is you will lose your focus. Your focus is on the numbers, and your focus is on not being biblical. Because sometimes, Wendell, you have to preach that some people can leave. They ain't gonna like the message you preach. So when you preach the message, it mightn't cause growth. It might cause deduction for a while. But what God is doing is he is working his thing. Jesus had that same problem, Wendell. Jesus preached a sermon in John, and he started talking to his disciples. He says, no one can follow me except they eat my flesh, drink my blood. They say, oh my goodness. He has gone into cannibalism. And the Bible says, many of them left. He looked around at the 12 and he says, are you all going to leave me too? And Peter, the mighty one, he gets him and says, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the word of life. All through Jesus' ministry, many times you'll see the word, many forsook him and fled. You know why? Because the teaching was a little rough on them. Some people are going to leave your church because you preaching too much Bible to them. You need to be a little softer, Rev. You need to preach more about the love of Christ. But I cannot preach the love of Christ without preaching the justice of Christ. And justice means that there will be disciplining for going off course. And that's our role. So our role is to stay focused on that. And anybody, Wendell, I believe, this is what I believe, that my role, I think I saw my role when I came, I started, Wendell, when I was 53. So I know I'm not a career pastor. I have a particular role here to fill. And God has called me to do that. And it is my belief that I will not reap in this scenario. So someone else will reap.
So what would you like to be remembered for after serving the many years as pastor of this church?
Here's what I would say about legacy. Legacy at this church, right? Legacy. If you ever try to make a name for yourself, that you want people to read, that this is what I want them, you can get off course. Here's how I see legacy and remembering me as pastor, is that I want to live out in someone else. So if I can pour myself into somebody, I'll never be forgotten. So if you're reproducing, you see, I'm going to live through I have one son, and what happens is, what I can't do is like people are seeing him do. I'll be dead and gone, but he'll be living me. People look at him and say, yes, there goes Shooter. So someone look at someone and say, yeah, that's him. He invested in people, not in your name being on a building. If your name is on a building, one day the building is going to fall. But if you get yourself in someone else, you live on into perpetuity.
There are many pastors who they have not done a good job in preparing successors. They have no succession planning going on. Is there a succession plan here in Salem? Are there people who are working in ministry and studying for the furtherance of this ministry?
That's something, Wendell, that we certainly have made a priority. We have a budget for that. And very shortly we expect someone to be able to take advantage of that. The whole church knows that I say that from the pulpit, not just for the pastorate, not just to replace me, but to be, if they are willing to be trained in any number of vocations in the church, young people's ministry, Sunday school, we are open to sending them for training so that they can come back and to be able to invest in the young people. No children and youth program means our church dies. So we actually are blessed to have an educational fund that is set up to be able to replace ourselves. And I'm talking about in every area. So I'm talking about the administrator of this church, those who work in finance in the church. We need, which we have started, we are planning to have these people be replaced. You see, because that's how the church continues to go. And so that's already in process, and I'm very pleased with that.
How big is your staff now?
We have, I believe it's 13 people full-time.
13 full-time?
Yeah, we have 13 people full-time.
Okay.
And I think that probably in another few years, I see 2 more persons that we will add to that. Because we want to be able to have a full-time person that deals with outreach in the area, a full-time person to do that, evangelism. That is what I feel is what is necessary to be able to sustain the church. See, the church can't be sustained without evangelism. Other than that, Wendell, you're fishing in someone else's pond.
Final question to you, Pastor Rolle. What is the centrality of your ministry here in Salem?
The centrality of that, I hope you would have heard that, and those who were listening to the program, I hope the centrality of the ministry here is to intentionally go and disciple the nations. That's our calling. Not nations there, and I can't help myself, Wendell, because I'm a teacher. Yeah. The word nations means, the Greek word is ethnos, where we get our words ethnicity from. Yes. And when Jesus talked about discipling the ethnos, he is talking about people other than Jews, other than your regular people, other than your home base, so that you are reaching out to every ethnicity in your area, not only locally, but nationally and internationally. Because our role, hear me, our role as ministers of the gospel is wherever there is not the worship of God, that the word of God needs to get there. Wherever God is not worshipped, it needs to be evangelized. That's it.
Pastor Rolle, on that note, I thank you so very much for giving me this opportunity to speak with you on this, your 8th anniversary, and congratulations. And We certainly hope that you would continue to move Salem from strength to strength. Thank you very much.
Thank you too, Wendell. It's certainly, once again, it was a pleasure having you, and God bless you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching our broadcast today. I'm so delighted that you decided to join Salem, the church with the open door. I trust that today's message has indeed been a blessing to you. If you've prayed the prayer of salvation, we want to walk with you. We have counseling and resources available to help you with the next steps in your spiritual journey. Please connect with us via email, our website, or our social media pages listed on the screen. Until next time, keep having a mind for truth and a heart for God. I'll see you next time.